Okay, so today's project on my 1965 Chevy C10 Pickup is to install a flat panel stereo like this in the place where the original factory radio was and the ashtray. I'm not a smoker and I don't want people smoking in my truck, so I'm going to get rid of this whole ashtray. I'm just going to remove it. And this radio area was hacked out by a previous owner, I guess, to make some bigger system fit or something, but really kind of raunched it out. So anyway, my plan is to cut this part of the dash out, just a rectangle, here to here, this whole section, just take this out and replace it with just a flat piece of steel. Then within that piece of steel, I'm going to cut out the rectangle I need to install my new flat screen stereo. And it's just going to fit. But what I thought I would do is cut the panel out and then tack it in just to make sure it's all how I want it and everything, and then remove it again and then cut the hole out in that panel for the stereo to go in, and attach mounting brackets and whatnot on the inside of the panel so that once I weld the panel in permanently, it'll be easy to install the stereo. But first of all, I have to cut out this section of the dash. And while I do own a angle grinder that I've used a lot on this truck for cutting sheet metal and all kinds of other things, I have found that these things, these huge things, are too powerful and too uncontrollable sometimes for smaller projects. So I also have an air-powered cutoff wheel with a 3-inch disc. So I'm going to be using that and trim this hole out. And also I'll probably use it to cut the new panel out of a sheet of steel to use for the replacement panel. So first of all, I'm going to remove this air switch and this removable panel just to keep it out of the way so it doesn't get damaged. And what I want to do is keep this look, this ridged look here, which matches this ridged look over here. So hopefully I'll continue to have these two ridged areas, and I'll just have a smooth, flat area in the middle that I can insert my new stereo in. And then down here, somebody's beat it up with a hammer, so that'll have to be smoothed out some way. Probably have to Bondo it too, just to smooth it out to make it look factory again. But for right now, the main project is to cut out the old damaged area and make a replacement panel for it. So we'll do that and get back to you. Okay, so before I start cutting, I have masked off the area that I want to trim. Inside this box is what I want to cut out. And so I just try to cover up the rest of the area of the dash that I hope will not be affected. I don't want the wheel to accidentally jump up and make a gouge in this area, or, you know, hit this ridge over here that I want to keep. So hopefully I can control it to just cut where I want it to, and I won't have any peripheral damage. So here we go. Okay, so now this thing can work like a charm. Very controlled. I can vary the air pressure going in and make it go slow or fast, and find out which direction gives me the most stability when I'm cutting. I cut up right to the corner and left the corners in until the very last, and then I kind of slowly ticked away at the corners and popped out perfectly, just like I wanted it to. So the old radio housing area, and ashtray are out of there. And I only slipped up in one spot, and that was down here. The thing, I don't know, it got bound up a little bit and jumped out and did a little extra grinding in there I didn't want, but that's no big deal because this whole area is going to have to get smoothed out anyway. But the cut, I'm pretty happy with it. I'm really happy. I'm going to pull the tape off now and maybe put a piece of cardboard in there and draw a template for my piece of sheet metal, and that'll be the next step. Okay, so I took a piece of real thin cardboard and I cut it a little bit bigger than the hole, and I taped it on from the back, and then I traced the opening that I have using this fine point Sharpie. I want to get it the most accurate pattern as I can get to match, you know, what I have there, match the hole. So just take this out now. And I can just trim it along those lines, and then maybe stick it on the sheet metal and trace that, and then cut out the sheet metal, and we'll have our patch. Okay, so I've got my pattern here. I've got my sheet metal to use, and I've got the piece I cut out, and what I want to do is match the gauge of the steel I use to the gauge of the dash. So I can take my sheet metal gauge and check the gauge of the metal used to make this panel that we just cut out. So if I stick this gauge on there, I believe it's like 18 or so gauge. If you can see that, 18 goes on there, all right. Let's see, how about 17? 17 is pretty loose, so I don't think it's 17. And the higher, or the lower the number, the thicker the metal. So it's not 17, it's thinner than that. And 18 goes on, but it's still kind of loose. And let's see, I really need a clean section of the cut to make an accurate measurement. Here, let's try this with the 19. Okay, so 19 goes on. It slides around pretty easily. So I think it's even thinner than 19. I think it's 20. 20 goes on. See, now 20's on there. Doesn't slide very easily. I think it's 20 because you have to remember this metal has primer and paint applied to it. So that adds a little bit of thickness. So I'm going to say the factory metal was 20 gauge. So I'm going to use 20 gauge steel to replace it. And I just so happen to have a sheet of 20 gauge mild steel. So that's what I'll use. Using the same gauge of metal will make the welding a lot easier because you're just kind of like blending one piece of the same gauge into another piece of the same gauge. If I was using thinner metal, the thinner metal would melt faster than the thicker metal, and that wouldn't work as well. If I was using thicker metal, I'd have to heat up this side more than this side, so it would be overheating the thinner metal. So if you match the gauges, you've got a better chance of getting a clean, weld. So I need to trim this out. I believe I'm going to trim this out with a sharp X-Acto knife. And then I'm just going to place it on top of this new sheet metal and trace it around this edge. A little bit on the outside because I want a little bit extra. And then I will cut that out again with my air cutoff wheel. And we'll see how it fits. Okay, so now we've got the replacement panel cut out. And let me try and mark the top and left and right so I don't put it in wrong. Now we got to see how well it fits. Probably need to do some trimming. Looks like top and bottom are pretty darn close. Actually, everything's pretty close. One thing I do notice is that here you can see that this is kind of bulging out a little bit right here, and this sheet is flat. So same on that side. It's a little bit of an arc to the dash, so I'm going to have to curve this panel a little bit to kind of coincide with the curve of the dash. So I will continue to tweak this. I'm going to give it a little bend, maybe over a piece of steel tubing, just to give it a slight bend in the middle. And then I'm going to clean up the edges in both the sheet and in the dash and make that fit in, closer. And probably use some clamps or some magnets to hold it in place. Maybe not yet, because I don't need to weld it in yet. I have to cut the whole opening for the stereo first. So let's just continue to work on making this fit in more cleanly. Okay, so old trampoline parts coming in handy here. This is going to work great for giving me this slight curve I need in the steel. I'm just going to softly bend it over this. Kind of need both hands for it, so you see what I'm doing. I'm just giving it a little bit of an arc so it matches the dash. Okay, so I ground down the edges and made some fine adjustments in the opening so that my new panel fits in flush, as much as I can everywhere. And now I just taped it in place because now I have to determine where I'm going to cut the hole for the radio. Now this radio, I'm just going to fit right in there somehow, centered. And so what's nice is that this radio has a frame that pops off. And so all I need to do is place this frame on my panel and center it, and then trace the inside and outside of the panel, of the frame, onto the panel. And then the inside line will show me the exact opening that there has to be, and then the outside line will be, there can't be any opening to that point because then it'll show. So I have what I need to know what distance I can go from the opening to the edge of this frame, so that when I put this frame on at the end, there won't be any gap showing. So it's kind of nice I have this to work with to determine the exact size I need. And then also with this radio, came these mounting brackets, which are perfect because I'll just have to weld these to the inside of the panel at the right place, and they attach. They're made to attach to the side of that stereo. So, but I can figure all that out on the workbench. Right now, I need to take this panel out again and mark where the hole's going to be and cut that opening, and then weld in the mounting brackets. Okay, so I've got the whole panel cut out and the opening cut out, and what I need to do now is further open up this inside area so that the thing goes over the stereo itself without any snags, because once the panel is welded in place, the stereo needs to pass through it when I install it. But right now there's these little things on the side that are sticking out, and those are the things that hold the frame in place. So I need to remove a little bit more metal so that the whole unit will slide in without catching on those, and then we'll be ready to mount the mounts. Okay, we're moving along now. So I've got the mounts attached to the stereo, just temporarily, like that. And so you can see that the frame rests nicely on the steel. That's what we want. And now all I want to do is weld these brackets to the back of the replacement panel I made. And the only thing I need to worry about is this steel panel has that bow in it from the dash. So if I would weld these things flat, that would make this panel flat and it wouldn't match the dash. So I'm going to have to put like something underneath the middle of this bracket, and then clamp the ends down tight so there's sort of a bow in it, and then weld it on, because then there'll be a slight bow even in the mount, and that'll make it match the dash angle. Oh, it's all in the details. Okay, just got done welding and put it all back together. So now we got these brackets. They're part of the replacement panel. You can see they're welded on there. I had it little offset a little bit so that these brackets were sticking out a little farther on this end, so I had to trim them off. But that shouldn't be a problem. So, next thing to do is to weld this piece into the truck, into the dash. I think maybe I'll hit it with some weld through primer first, just to give it something so it's not rusted away back there. Okay, so I got it all primered and I ground off the edges to get a good weld. I tried to place it in there as flush as I can. I tried to hold it in place with these magnets and this big super magnet. And what I need to do now is tack it one there, maybe one over here, just kind of go around tacking it and make sure that it's flush before I commit it solid to welding, so I'm just going to start tacking it with my big welder. Well, there's the first round of tack welds. I think I got it pretty well leveled in there. We'll see after I weld a bunch more and grind down to see if it goes flat. Down here it's a little tough because there's kind of a ridge I have to maintain here. So I'm going to weld all that up and I'm going to have to kind of grind in a ridge, I think. So that's not going to be easy. Okay, that was a bunch of ugly welding. Well, I think I've had enough for today. I'm just going to let that cool and come back next time I get a chance and grind that all that ugly stuff down and see where I gotta do some more welding to fill in the holes, and keep doing that until I get a nice smooth connection. So we'll pick it up then. Okay, so we're back at it, and it's time to clean up some of these clean up all these welds. We got a little heavy with the wire feed, and I think they had the wire feed up too high, so I was getting way too much metal into those welds. So we got a big mountain range of welds to grind down now to smooth out. And instead of using my angle grinder, I'm going to use my 3-inch cutoff wheel to trim off a bunch of the metal first, and then when it gets low enough, then I'll use the angle grinder and smooth it all out. So here we are. I've ground down most of the ugly overwelds and tried to fill a few little pinholes that we ended up having. Here, a couple over here, so I still got to grind those down again. And then down here, where I had this panel going down behind this one, where there was a big gap, I welded the daylights out of this, hoping I could make it thick enough where I could grind it and make this ridge again. But the metal is so thin here that it burns right through, even when my lowest welding settings. So I don't think it's gonna work. I think I have to replace this section because it's all full of holes and they just get burned in holes, bigger holes. So I took another piece of the 20 gauge steel and I bent it on my vise as best I could to duplicate this little ridge thing where it's flat and then it has a ridge coming out. See, flat, little ridge right there. And so my hope is that I can cut out a section of this, maybe from here to here maybe, and just trim this thing to fit, trim this patch panel to fit in there, and weld in new metal. And actually, this is where it was all beat up previously too, so it will eliminate that, and the new metal should be smoother. So I'll just have to, I guess I'll try to, maybe I'll just match this edge. I'll cut it down like that. That way I'll only have to weld here, here, and here. I won't have to do a seam this way again. So maybe there'll be a seam like down here, but you won't see that as much. But it depends on how much I trim down this piece.
how far I decide to go under with it. So, not really down to where point I wanted to be, but what are you gonna do? It's fun experimenting with bending metal to fit and shaping metal, making your own patch panel. So, we'll see how it goes from this point. Okay, so getting back at it. I've decided that this is so messed up that I think it's better if I just eliminated it and put new metal in there. So what I'm thinking of doing is cutting it down like that on both sides, and then down here somewhere, peeling that off, and then getting a whole new piece of metal to take that place. And the trick is going to be to create this edge to it, this bump. It's not just flat, it comes to a ledge and curves under. So to replicate that, I'm going to have to bend this piece of metal right here a couple of times to reproduce this effect. And then once it's correct, tack that in, grind it smooth, and it'll be done. The only issue that concerns me though is inside the dash there's actually a second layer of steel that is, I assume, spot welded to the outer skin to make the whole dash more solid. And so I don't want to cut that, so I'm gonna have to be careful how deep I go and just cut the skin part off, not the inner bracing. It's down a ways, but I might run into it, so I have to be careful of that. So maybe I'll try to keep my cut here above where that thing is, just to keep it simpler. So next deal to do is make my lines here and get the old 3-inch cutting wheel out and remove that bad metal. All right, that worked well, and I can see I cut that out and take that out. Gives me a nice clean space to work with. You can see the horrible welding I did on that. Awful. And you can also see that inner ridge I was talking about, that secondary piece of steel that's spot welded to the skin of the dash. So I missed that. It's down another 1/4 inch or so, so that's good. So my new piece of steel should go from here up to about here. And I just have to make this ridge here. Should be able to see it better if I take this off. You can see it in profile there. It's kind of banged up, but see it better on this side. Maybe even on that side it's a little banged up already, so anyway, gotta make a flat and then a bump up and a curve under. So we'll see about doing that now. Okay, so here's the piece of 20 gauge that I made the other patch out of, and I've already tried to crease it in a way that matches the factory look. So I'm gonna use this that I cut out as my pattern and just trace around it, So it should fit perfectly where this was taken out of, at least pretty close. And I'm thinking I'm probably going to have to rework this bump though. This, what I have here, I think it's too severe. It's more severe than the truck has. So I might have to smooth that down a little bit, but I thought I'd cut it out first. It'd be easier to work with a smaller piece. So, get the old cutting wheel out again. Alright, so here's the piece. I think it's gonna work. I think it fits real nicely on the bottom where I cut it, and the ridges seem to be pretty much where I want them. There's gonna be a little Bondo over it all to smooth it all out, of course, but I just have to trim off the top edge here to be the exact opening that we had before the stereo. I'm kind of kicking myself because I cut it a little too short, so I'm gonna have to fill in some gaps. But yeah, could be worse. So let's trim this thing down, grind off the paint where I need to weld, tack it in, see how it looks. Okay, so it just occurred to me that once I mount this in the dash, it's going to be in this hole in the dash, and it's going to be hanging on these two side brackets only. So when I go to put it in, it might want to flop around like this. So I thought, well, if this is going to be the front edge of the dash there, after I weld it in, why don't I put a little plate back here to hold the bottom of the radio, like this. This is going to go like that. I could take a piece of sheet metal, just a scrap, and weld it to the back of that plate I'm going to weld in. And it could be an additional brace holding up the bottom of the radio. And I could place it somewhere out of the way. So I don't want to put it here because it would cover up these. So I'd have to be careful to make it narrow enough to go right there. So I'm going to make that up and tack it on the back of this thing before I weld it in the truck. Okay, so here we are. I messed around with it a lot, and I'm fiddling around with it to make it flush as possible. Can use these magnets to hold it in place. Get to the welding part. Just wanted to show what I did here. So that's the front, and this is the flange. I stuck out the backs so the stereo can rest on that. And I also added little tabs on the sides and on the bottom from the back, just to hold it in place while I'm trying to locate it, because otherwise it kept falling into the hole. With these little tabs, they hold it from falling out. They can help me locate it, situate it without falling out. See, that'll help me get it ready to weld. So that's where we're at. Still got some big gaps, but it's certainly not perfect, and certainly not like one of these metalworking guys on YouTube would do it, but that's why we have Bondo, for us amateurs. I'm going to weld this thing in, grind it as smooth as I can. I'm going to contour it with some Bondo. What else can I do, you know? Is it really worth anything more than that anyway? I don't know. So I'm to the point now where I'm just grinding my welds down, and I think I'm going to Bondo it next. And I just noticed something interesting when I sand the steel, the bond or the welds, little pieces of metal are being flown off, and they're getting caught by these magnets. I have these magnets sitting here. Watch what happens. Pretty amazing. Okay, so I'm tired of welding and trying to fill in holes and re-welding and grinding and filling more holes, and I'm at the point now where I'm gonna use some fiberglass Bondo and fill in the holes, and then you know, smooth that out, and then cover it with regular Bondo to give me a smooth finish. I'm just going back and forth too many times, and it's not worth it. It's not like it's going to be on the outside where it's going to start rusting or anything. It's inside the cab. It's going to be dry all of its life basically, so I don't know why I need to have solid steel. I'm just going to use the fiberglass Bondo to strengthen the holes, fill the holes, and then cover it all with regular Bondo, and see how smooth I can get this thing, how clean I can get it to look. So next step, Bondo. Okay, so back to the project. I think when I quit before, I said I was not going to do any more welding because I was sick and tired of it. But I weakened and decided I was going to do it anyway. So I put a piece of steel behind this panel from the back. I drilled some holes in this, and I welded it into that. So there's a steel backing now. So when I fill these other holes, they're not holes that go all the way through anymore. They're just going back to the second piece of steel. So I'm going to fill these holes in with the fiberglass Bondo and do a thin skim coat of that. And then when that's dry, I'll sand that, and I'll put the regular Bondo on to make it a smooth finish and prime it. So that's kind of how it is at this point. So we got the fiberglass Bondo layer put down, filled in some of the holes, covered up some of the deep areas, and I'm going to let that dry, let that harden up good, and then I can sand it a little, sand down the high areas again, the bumps, and put a layer of smoother regular Bondo over this whole thing. I still have to build up this area here. This kind of dips in here, so I'm going to have to build that up with some Bondo. Try to get a nice straight line. Try to get this defined straight across, and get it to a point where we can prime it. I was originally going to paint this dash the same color that I painted my door panels and inside of my doors, because it's close to the original factory color. But I don't know, I'm kind of lazy. I don't feel like taking the whole dashboard out and, you know, the gauges and all that stuff, taking the steering column down, taking apart the glove box door. So right now I'm considering maybe making this area a different color, maybe just a black, you know, like a satin black or a semi-gloss black, just separate out. I mean, that whole area there is quite kind of black, and if I made this black, it might kind of match, and that way I don't have to worry about, you know, matching up the paint, the factory paint color. And I don't know, I'll probably eventually do the whole dash over again once I pop the windshield out and get a new windshield and deal with any rust that might be around there. But just for this project, I think I'm just gonna prime it and maybe paint it a black. I don't know, we'll see. I might change my mind. Okay, so I've got to the point now where I've got all the Bondo put on and sanded down and pretty much smooth, like I think it should be. I'm still not sure about if this shape down here is correct. There's still little imperfections in the Bondo and whatnot, and I'm not sure this ridge looks correct, because it's hard to tell with the Bondo, with the blue Bondo with the silver metal showing through and different tones of paint you're sanding through. So I'm just going to hit it with some filler and sandable primer. So I'll put a coat of that on there, and usually when you have paint on, it'll show up all the imperfections very well, and you can go in and spot fill all the holes, and you can get a better idea how this shape is turning out. And you know, with a solid color, it's easier to, you know, see the actual shape of the thing. So I'm going to spray a little paint on there, a little bit of primer. Okay, so we got a coat of filler sandable primer on there, and already I can see where things need to be reworked and done over. I mean, you can kind of see the rough spots where you need like a little bit of filler and little pock marks and stuff, and maybe some spot putty. I think this ridge still needs work here. I think it's almost too thick right here, because the ridge is thicker here than over here and over here. It's like sticking out too much. So I think I gotta take that down a little bit more. But see, that's where the primer helps. It makes it more visible what needs to be corrected. So little by little, we're getting there. I guess I'm just gonna let this dry like overnight at least, so that I'm not smudging the paint. I'm actually sanding it, so it has to be nice and dry for that. So we're getting there slowly. Okay, so we're back at it, and as I said before, there's some problems with it yet I need to smooth out. You can see pock marks there and up there, and this ridge, like I said, it's kind of thin here, but then it gets bulging out there. It needs to be like that, so that needs to go down a little bit more. I think I'm just going to sand this down here, bring it down lower. It almost feels like it dips like right here down a little bit. Might have to build that up a little bit. I don't know, I'll see after I lower this area down a little bit to make it more like the ridge needs to be. So, time for more sanding. Maybe a little more Bondo. Okay, so I applied another layer of Bondo to build up this area here a little bit because I felt like I was going down, and then to smooth out some of those holes in there. So now once this dries good enough so I can sand it, hopefully I can sand it down to a level where I won't need any more Bondo. I'll probably just touch up some spots with some spot putty that'll fill in those spots real easily, and then give it another coat of primer. And getting closer to getting ready to paint. I hope to do that today. We'll see.
Okay, so now we're getting really close. I've got all the Bondo flattened out pretty well. I feel like I fixed this ridge pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. And I used some of this fine spot putty to fill in tiny holes and whatnot. And that should easily sand down. I'm gonna use some 500 grit and hopefully get this nice and smooth, and maybe give it one more shot of primer to cover up this layer color spot putty, and then after the primer dries, hopefully I can paint it today. I think if I have the materials I need, I am going to go with the color I used to paint my door panels. It's pretty close to factory, but there might be a seam showing, but oh well. My truck's not perfect. We'll see how it looks.
Okay, so we got it all primed again, and hopefully that should be it for the primer. And next thing is the color coat. I'm gonna tear off all the masking and redo it so that I'm creating the exact limit to the new paint. And then once that's all set up, then I'll put more masking paper around everything to protect it all. So that'll be ready to paint. And then I've also prepared the one extra panel that goes on the dash. I've primed that, and I'm also going to paint the gauges panel that hangs underneath the dash. So I don't know, so it looks better. Goes along with the dash better. So getting close now. I've got the paint ready here. I have paint left over from when I did the door panels, and I hope I have enough activator. It's kind of gelling up, but I think it'll get reduced by the reducer and work okay. So got my mask. Once I get ready to paint, I'll mix her up and go from there. Okay, got it all masked off, ready to spray the color on. Hopefully I can get on a nice solid drip-free coat, and maybe a second one, and then let it harden up and see how it looks. Okay, got my first coat on there. Well, not too bad. I mean, sure, it's showing all the imperfections again, but you know, I'm not taking this truck to SEMA or something. It's just my daily driver in the summer. Not daily driver, my fun truck in the summer. So I'm not looking for show quality. So there's the dash, and then I got the gauge panel painted, and the other panel that clicks into the dash here. And I've still got quite a bit of paint left. my gun, so in a few minutes I'll put another coat on. All right, I got my second coat on, and I'm just waiting for it all to dry so I can take all the masking off and start putting it all back together. I've come quite a ways from how it was originally, where we had the ashtray. I had the ashtray at the top, and we had the whacked out radio area at the bottom. Took all that out, replaced it with new panel to incorporate the flat panel stereo. So maybe the next shot will be when I have the radio installed, so you can see what it looks like. Oh wow, I am really surprised at how well this thing turned out. You can barely even tell where the paint changes. It's so close. It's still hardening up, so I'm not going to mess with it, but I am really pleased at how that turned out. That's going to look great. I put the panel back in, I put the stereo in. Wow, I am surprised. Took a lot of work to get to this point, but gee, I'm really happy. Turned out really nice. Well, okay, here we are, finished. The finished product didn't turn out too bad. Paint looks very similar to the factory finish. I still got to do some work on the glove box. It's not fitting quite right, but I'm pretty happy with how the radio came in there, fits in there. Got this thing put back in. I realized I had it upside down before, so this really goes up above. Painted my gauge panel here to match the dash, so that looks a little better that way. So all in all, I think it was a success. I still have to wire the stereo. I haven't totally installed it, but I have to get the speakers and all that stuff and wire all that up, and then we'll be complete. But the changeover of the dash, I think it worked out well. I'm really happy with it.